You also talked to James Cameron.
I did indeed. It is correct. I caught up with the director of the Oscar-winning movie the other day in our green room when he was in for a visit. What do you think is the #1 thing that draws people to the Titanic today, still 100 years later?
I think it varies by individual. I think if you're a 12-year-old kid, you know, those heroic officers getting the lifeboats launched and people, you know, living and dying in extremis. I think if you're older, maybe if you have a family, if you have children, you think about the heartbreak of having to say goodbye, that idea of separation. Because it's really death in slow motion. On Titanic, it's very cut and dried. You're either going to get in the boat and survive, or you're going to stay on the ship and die. And people had to say goodbye to their family members, their loved ones, as the boats were being lowered. That image is going to endure for 1,000 years, I think.
We saw the recreation of the Grand Staircase in Pigeon Forge.
Right.
Something that plays a huge role in your film as well.
Well, it's almost a character in and of itself. It was the centerpiece, the sort of the majestic centerpiece of the ship. And I've been there to the real Grand Staircase many times. On almost every dive we go there because that's where we can access the interior with our robotic vehicles. So whenever I go exploring through Titanic, we enter through the Grand Staircase.
It's kind of interesting that that's the place where you have to enter the ship, just like it was the place where all of these first-class passengers, for really the first time, were having contact with the biggest ship of its time, the most glorious thing they had ever seen.
It was the first thing they saw when they came in through the entry doors, when they boarded from the pier or from the tender boats. They came in and they saw that they could look down 5 stories. And of course, it might have been one of the last things they saw as they looked down and saw the water coming up through that stairwell, and they ran out to get on the boats or didn't get on.
The New York Times article from this week about this idea that maybe it was the tides, there was some sort of mirage, maybe science actually created the Titanic problem as opposed to human beings?
I think it's fun to find new stories to tell, but they're embellishing in sort of Baroque detail around the essence of the story. The essence of the story was human arrogance and greed caused men who had responsibility for other people's lives to drive the biggest ship in history into a known ice field at night despite warnings, and they crashed into an iceberg. It's pretty simple. Now, the beauty of Titanic is there's so much fractal complexity in the story that you'll always find new things. You know, we for example, did a big forensic study of the sinking over the last few years, and we found out an amazing thing that has never been known before, which is that every time we ran the model, the Titanic rolled on its side.
Really?
Sometimes to one side, sometimes to the other side, but it never stayed straight up. But we know from history that it did. It stood straight up and allowed them to launch those lifeboats 6 stories down both sides of the ship simultaneously, which saved 700 people. So why did it happen? Well, nobody from the engineering spaces survived to tell the tale. And we now think that they were running pumps to keep the ship trimmed, desperately trying to hold it on an even keel so that they could get the lifeboats off. And those guys were heroes that literally stayed at the pumps to the last second and died as a result of it. And nobody's ever talked about it because we had to run the model to understand that missing piece.
That's a magnificent
it's pretty
story.
Cool, huh?
It's so cool, and it's, I mean, when you think about the heroes in the story, the engineers don't get first billing as that.
No, they don't, of course
But
not.
It really sounds like they played a significant role in saving more lives.
That's right, absolutely. Probably at least half of the people that survived owe their lives to those guys. And that story has never been told because nobody knew about it.
Something you'll tell someday.
That's right.
All right, well, James Cameron, thank you so much.
Hey, great
this was
talking to you.
fascinating,
Yeah,
absolutely fascinating.
Well, it's nice to do it.
It's a good word to describe it. It really was fascinating.
He's both a scientist and an artist, and I love that about him.
Yeah. I don't know what he's going to do next. Interesting. Good stuff.